Welcome to More Than a Refresh, a podcast with conversations with the most interesting people you've never met and may never have heard of. Today we are recording from Astoria, Queens, Panama City, Florida, and Cle Elum, Washington. Our guest is Patrick Broderick, forester and founder of Eastside Forestry. Patrick, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey everybody, my name is Patrick. I'm a consulting forester. I live in Cle Elum, Washington. So that's the East Cascades of Washington. I love forestry. I've got a lot to talk about in terms of what's going on right now, and I'm hoping to educate the public more as to some misconceptions around the practice and the study of forestry.
Awesome. Now, Clay, as most of our listeners know, I'm from the about as northwest as you can get of Washington, which is Bellingham. There is I think it's Point Roberts that you actually have to go through Canada to get to in the United States. It's more northwest. But we're about, 3 hours from each other?
I believe so. Something 3, maybe 4 if you hit the Seattle traffic.
So 10. But vastly different environments, whereas Bellingham is temperate and wet and very mild in the summer on a general rule. You are cold, dry, and then hot. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. And that's actually reflective of the ecosystems of the Cascades. So the East Cascades, where I'm in, is in a rain shadow. So we get reduced rain. We have hotter summers. We have colder winters, more snow. The West Cascades and kind of going up that Cascade line get a lot more rain, a lot more. And then that actually has a significant effect on the condition of the forest that can grow there. For example, the forest that grows here, especially lower in these Cascades, it's what we call basically it's reduced. There's a lot less water, right? So the trees can't grow as big. They can't grow as close to one another. The carrying capacity.
And they're also different types of trees, right? Isn't it? They're pine and cedar, right?
Yeah. So we got ponderosa pine. That's kind of the lower elevation. And then we get up into the Douglas fir. You guys got a lot of Douglas fir over there. Mm-hmm. Then we kind of get up more into we got grand fir, we got subalpine fir, Pacific silver fir, then kind of into the western red cedar, western hemlock. We have a huge diversity of species across the Eastern Cascades. And as you move up the slope of the Eastern Cascades, the water availability increases and the species composition changes dramatically, often over even a couple hundred feet of elevation, ginormous change in ecological systems.
So let's talk about that. I mean, was this your goal when you were growing up? Was it firefighter, doctor, forester? What is it that you wanted to do when you grew up?
Yeah, when I remember very strong memory of mine. When I was 8 years old, I went to my parents and I said, hey, I think I either want to be like a forester, park ranger kind of thing, like work outside, or I want to be a history teacher. I'm a huge history buff. And they sat me down, 8-year-old kid, and they were like, you're going to struggle financially in both of those careers all your life. And that was like a big, I guess, slap in the face to a little kid of like, okay, I guess I'm not doing that. And so I pursued my dad's a doctor. So I pursued the engineering route. I've always been good at math and science. And all through high school, I was going to be an engineer. And I actually started college in engineering, did a semester of it, and completely hated it. And then I kind of just was reflecting, and I came to the conclusion that I need to do something that I care about, that is meaningful to me, and not in pursuit of a paycheck. And that is how I wound up in forestry.
So that's interesting. I'm clearly quite a bit older than you, but that's what I'm trying to do now, not forestry, but what I'm doing now is pursuing more things that are of a passion to me. And I think it's fantastic that you've been afforded a privilege where you get, granted, you're never going to make $1 million, but you're doing something that you love, and being able to do something that you love it just makes you a healthier person. And so from a holistic intentional perspective, I applaud you for taking that risk, because your parents weren't wrong. I can say at least it wasn't history, because I have kids, and I've always told my kids, I will 100% support you pursuing your passion as a minor. Right. So you've got your degree, whether business, science, whatever. And then if you want to be art history or, Greco-Roman, whatever, I don't care, but it's your minor. You need to be able to contribute to society in a way that allows you to live on your own. So the fact that you've been able to do that in forestry, my hat's off to you. That's awesome.
Yeah, I feel it's kind of one of those things where I just kind of somehow winded up here. But I feel incredibly blessed with what I get to do, and the fact that I get to make any money whatsoever off of this it's a miracle in itself.
So, what's something that, because we're going to be talking about, we're talking about something that's obviously in the now, right, politically and societally, and a lot of misunderstandings about what's going on. But what's something that you're passionate about that has nothing to do with work?
Yeah, the American Revolution. I'm a huge American Revolution war buff. I have read more books than I care to recount about the American Revolution, particularly the early American Revolution. I grew up in upstate New York, specifically Saratoga Springs. That's where the turning point of the American Revolution was fought. That's where we kind of fought a major battle and convinced the French basically that to join us and to send over soldiers and send over arms and funding that really helped turn the tide against the British. And I'm actually working on very, very slowly chipping away at a historical fiction book, kind of that goes through the history of the American Revolution through fictional characters that are living through real historical events.
So a book, but the lighter side of the Patriot.
Yeah, I guess you could say that. It's still very much in the early days, but I joke with my wife, it'll be done in 40 years, but I would like to be done in more like 5 or 10.
I applaud you. I mean, as someone who has co-authored a book and literally hundreds and hundreds of articles, writing is hard. And even the most gifted writers, you can tell when a writer phones it in because it's their yearly contribution to a series, for example. And when someone really puts their mind and heart to it, an obvious one would be Stephen King, right? Where you see something like The Stand or Green Mile or Christine versus any number of his other, I was bored on a Saturday, so I kicked out 140 pages, right? And that doesn't mean it's not a good story. It's just that you can definitely see, the quality difference, the investment difference.
Yeah, writing is, well, you go ahead.
No, right, go please.
Well, so as a forester, I do a lot of scientific writing, and it's great. I excel at it. I enjoy it, but at some point it gets a little lame it gets boring. Like I need a mix up, and that's kind of what this historical fiction project is like. I'm like, I need a creative output that isn't so scientific based.
I forget his name, but a good role model, I guess, in that faction would be the guy that wrote The Martian.
Yeah, I can't remember his name, but that is.
I can't remember his name right now. I'm sure Lindsay will put it in the notes or something. But he did a lot. He's a lot of research to get The Martian at least reasonably accurate, right? The movie doesn't follow it exactly, but they did a good job. So, talk to me about your career. The path of your career. Where did you start?
Yeah, so after that kind of one-off semester in engineering, I switched colleges. I moved from upstate New York to Montana. I moved to Bozeman, Montana, Montana State University, and that's where I pursued my undergrad in conservation biology and ecology. While I was pursuing that degree, 2 summers, I went off my junior and senior year. Those summers, I went and worked for the Forest Service. Junior year, I worked as a forester in Northern California, in the East Cascades of Northern California. And senior year, I worked as a botanist in the East Cascades of Oregon. And so this is kind of like a theme. And again, you'll see it in the name of my company, Eastside Forestry. I work in the East Cascades. It's a unique ecosystem, and it's the ecosystem that I know and understand best. And yeah.
So that's kind of interesting. The fact when you said botany, that's actually one of the few sciences that I have considered actually going back to school for. It's just intriguing to me how much people don't understand that plants aren't simple. They are complex organisms, and everything is connected. So it is something, and I'm not talking about like from a philosophical perspective. I am talking about from, I don't care if you're a Christian or a hardcore Big Bang science evolutionist. The reality is everything on this planet is part of an ecosystem, including us, and they are all connected. And that actually kind of rolls us in. What exactly does a consulting forester do as opposed to like, a park ranger or forest ranger? What are you doing to help?
So typically like a park ranger, I'm speaking very broadly here.
Sure.
Would be more like trail maintenance, making sure folks are complying by the laws, making like stewarding the land, but in a different way, more in the context of public facing, making sure people are, giving them maps, giving them guidance, teaching them the importance of staying on the trail, teaching them about the ecology of that area. A forester is also a very broad reaching concept. But generally speaking, a forester stewards a piece of land. So after college, after I graduated, I got an offer as lead forester for the Teanaway Community Forest here. It's 51,000 acres, about 78 square miles. And my job was to take care of that forest. Now, one person taking care of that much land, not really possible. So I had a good amount of help, and I had to break things into pieces, right? And so we identified what a priority area was, and then basically broke that down. I think it was like 15,000 acres, and that was my area to work in. And basically, what I did was I sat down with the biologists that were helping me, and we assessed conditions on the ground. We looked at basically the situation on the ground, and we talked about the objectives for the community forest, and basically we talked about how can we affect change and change the forest from what it is right now into what we would like to see it become. And we'll get more into this later, but most of our forests they're young, they're not very healthy, they are lacking structural complexity, they are not good habitat for wildlife, and a lot of our forests need an actual guiding hand. They can't just be left alone to grow.
So you're right. We'll get into this a little bit later, but I did want to touch on it because I'll lose it otherwise. That is, a lot of that has to do with and correct me if I'm wrong, but the human intervention, right? Actually harvesting of timber, and then our replant strategies originally were not, they didn't take into consideration the bigger picture, right? They took into consideration that I have harvested wood, therefore I must plant a tree, not I must build habitat in a healthy way that allows a surplus of benefit. Would that be accurate?
Yes. Yes. Basically, our forests have been clear cut / high graded. High graded is when they go after the largest, biggest, healthiest trees. Kind of what someone would think about as like an old growth tree, really furrowed bark, really ginormous branches, potentially hundreds of feet tall. That's where all the timber value was. So they pulled that out and they clear cut in a lot of other areas. And then, interestingly enough, they didn't actually do a lot of planting because there were many laws regulating that for a very long time. So basically, they just left the forest as it was, and it grew back. But this is the theme of why forests need a guiding hand, is that it would be great if we could just let our forests sit and they would fix themselves. Unfortunately, pretty much none of the forests that we have today are natural. They have all been heavily modified. They've all been disturbed in all these different ways that have completely disrupted the ecological mechanisms that these forests have used to take care of themselves. So these forests are lost. They're like a child wandering around the woods, like calling for mom and dad. Like it really is that bad. And this is a result of human logging and human intervention.
So the human intervention, you bring up harvesting, right? And which I think obviously is a big problem, but I would think that's narrow in its view, because an example of one of the problems they've had in Yellowstone is that they got rid of the wolves. You get rid of the wolves, there's no population for control for things like elk, and then elk destroy the forests. So and then they bring back the wolves, and then you've got people complaining about wolves for good reason, but still without understanding the actual implications of not having the wolves, which is we are trying, as you said, to manage these natural resources in a way that I said, which is a surplus benefit. Is that also your understanding?
Yeah. So from what I'm understanding from what you're saying, it's not just the past implications of timber harvesting. It's also, we've eliminated many different species across this landscape. Mm-hmm. Like on the East Coast, for example, there's caribou, there was elk historically there, all gone. Wolves have been killed off for a long time. These species helped regulate other wildlife populations, such as deer. And deer have quite a negative impact on forest. Often they eat specific species, often species that are desirable to grow. I know in the Midwest and across the East Coast, the overpopulation of white-tailed deer is a huge forest health problem, and it is causing devastation across many different forests in areas of significant overpopulation. So yes, it's not just timber harvesting. Another quick example would be fire fighting, specifically in Eastern Cascades. We have suppressed wildfires here for over 100 years now. The ecology of this area depends upon fire. Basically, fire was this like natural mechanism that would sometimes burn. It would kill some trees, the less healthy trees typically. It would leave behind the healthier trees. It would alleviate fuel loads. It would allow for more species diversity to bloom afterwards. So there's all these different things that humans have disrupted that our forests relied on and have evolved concurrently with for thousands of years that are no longer in place.
So, and to be clear for those who will listen to that and be like, well, now we need to kill all the deer. That is not what he's saying. What he's actually alluding to is what I was mentioning earlier, which is we're all connected. It has to be managed because humans, as the dominant, as well as the most destructive of biology on the planet, we need to be smarter about it. We have a responsibility to actually steward these things. And you're right. I mean, I was taught that in school. I don't know if they still teach that, but I was taught like fire is not bad necessarily, right? It's for forests. And it's why I used to have property in White Salmon, Washington, which is just outside the Gifford-Pinot National Forest. And they had a big, big fire called the Cold Springs Fire, and it burned. I mean, it was huge fire. And a lot of people were like, why aren't we fighting this? Well, it wasn't man-made. It was a lightning fire. And that's part of the process, right? Part of the process to, like you said, to eliminate unhealthy trees that are infested with, what is it? Pine beetles, I think is one of the big problems, versus healthy trees, versus that's one of the ways that pine cones actually drop the seed of the pine nut, which is for fire. All that stuff interplays. So anyway, without going too far down that, you said your baseline goal is basically to manage the forest, make it look what you want it to look like. That's a little vague. What would be, and obviously the forest you want it to look different depending on where you're at and what its purpose is. But as a general rule, what is it that you're trying to do with the forest?
Yeah, it's actually, I have a pretty simple answer to that. What I'm trying to do is to help restore our forests basically to their former glory, to what they once were before humans came and cut most of them down. This is specifically, I'm trying to manage for old growth quality forest, which is a forest that's dominated by a spatial complexity that has some areas of openings, some areas of big trees, some areas of small trees, some areas of down wood, some standing wood, basically spatial complexity across the landscape. That is what our forests are lacking significantly these days because they are so young, because they are the regrowth of selective, or excuse me, of clear cutting, of this high grading, that basically, yeah, I'm trying to restore them to their former glory, and I'm trying to set them up for future success. Our forests are facing threats that they have never had to face before: climate change, unprecedented amounts of wildfire, unprecedented levels of drought. The Southwest United States, for example, is in a mega drought right now. I believe, as I understand it, it's the worst drought in over 1,000 years, as they model it. We have unprecedented levels of insect outbreaks. So basically, yes, I am trying to help restore our forests on the path of put them towards a path of becoming these old growth, spatially complex forests that can support wildlife species that are healthier, as well as considering all these different things that they're facing, such as climate change, such as all these increased drought stressors that these forests have not contended with before.
All right, I'm going to push back a little bit. This isn't an argument about climate change. I mean, climate change is clearly happening. I think that even any reasonable individual that can look outside and pattern their climate over 50 years can see that it's changing. Where I'm pushing back is that the forests have never dealt with it before. There's a lot of reasons why we're encountering the problems we have, whether it be, man-made emissions or whatever. But you can see throughout the history of, archaeology or climatology or geology, whatever. I mean, for example, the Sahara used to be an ocean, mm-hmm. right? The Badlands used to be an ocean. And there's some interesting problems that have been encountered. Obviously we don't have written history of this. This is all circumspect of this is what we think happened based on this rock, right, that we're studying. But I don't think it's fair to say they've never encountered it. I think that it's better to say, and maybe I'm nitpicking, but it's important, that they've never encountered it at this accelerated rate.
Yes, I would agree with that.
Which is why it's so important, is actually my point.
Yes, so you're absolutely correct that our forests have encountered, a changing climate before, right? Ice ages, stuff like that. That's pretty well known, right? So kind of what I was saying is, yes, our forests have encountered that before, and they've survived and done well through it. Now, our forests look nothing like they used to. So the forest structure as it is today is facing an unprecedented change. Basically that, 10,000 years ago when we had, perhaps a warming climate in a certain context after the last ice age, the forest was stressed. It was combating, a changing climate such as drought, increased wildfire. However, the forest had a lot more. I mean, it was just so much more back then. It had a lot more old growth qualities. It had a lot more spatial complexity. There were less trees per acre, so that the trees that were behind are able to be vigorous. They're actually able to withstand these levels of drought. So that's kind of what I didn't really do a very good job clarifying that, but that's kind of what I'm saying is the forest structure as it is today is set up very, very, very poorly to deal with this level of changing climate. That's kind of what I'm trying to allude to.
Do me a favor, just I understand everything you're saying, but I think we need a little bit of description of spatial complexity.
Yes.
What, can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. So generally speaking, I'm just going to try to vision this out for people. If you go and do most forests that we have today, you just walk into a forested area, not like a residential area, but it's complete continuous forest area. First of all, you're going to have a lot of shade. You're going to have not a whole lot of sunlight hitting the ground. If you look up into the canopy of the trees, let's say the trees are 100 feet tall, most of the limbs, the live green limbs of those trees are going to be in the top 30, 40, maybe 50 feet max. That first 50 foot of the trees is mostly going to be stem. It's not going to be a whole lot of live foliage. So that's one example of lacking vertical spatial complexity. There's all the tree foliage that's at the top of the forest, and there's very little at the bottom. That's not great for many different wildlife species. Now, there's also horizontal complexity. So as you walk through the forest, oh, here's an opening here where some trees have fallen down, perhaps in a windstorm or an ice storm, something like that. Where we have, and then once those trees fall down, where we'll have what we call regeneration, new growth, new seedlings basically are growing in that area. Now, if you walk through most of the forests that we have, you're not going to see that. You're going to see small little pockets of that, but for the most part, you're going to be able to look through that forest and you're going to be able to see quite far, right? That is not what a healthy forest looks like, generally speaking. It's what a young, early successional is what we call it, forest looks like, which is significantly overrepresented on the landscape right now. But it's not spatially complex. It's in a lot of ways, to a forester, it's very monoculture. It's very much the same. And I work on so many different properties that are exactly like this, where I just look across it and it's just the same. There's different species here and there. There's different trees here and there, but for the most part, I can see far. There's a lot of shade. There's not a lot of, disturbances, i.e., a little half acre where there's a windstorm where the canopy opened up and we're able to have diversification of age classes of trees. So that's kind of what I'm speaking to in terms of spatial complexity.
And let's be clear. I mean, there are exceptions. And I want to, and the reason I'm throwing out this exceptions, and if I'm wrong, correct me, is because I know a lot of people who are brilliant people because of being in tech, very intelligent, very knowledgeable in a lot of things. But there's this baseline of, well, it's common sense. There's a tree. And it's just not that simple. And if you look at it in terms of the spatial complexity you're talking about, there are absolutely forests that have that complexity.
Yes.
But they're deep where, they're Olympic National Park.
Yes.
Right. Very deep into where humans, let's call it not humans, but civilization, we were able to protect that before we got to it.
Exactly.
But in the area that you're in specifically, I mean, it was tapped, right? I mean, it was like, tree, cut it down, right? And that's where you're consulting, right? Now, are you consulting privately, or are you one of those guys that's making all of its money off of our tax?
No, I'm mostly a private consulting forester. I can jump into that a little bit if you'd like me to.
Yeah, please.
So yeah, I basically help small landowners steward their land. So what that looks like is I serve as someone as small as a half acre of forest up to someone with several hundred acres of forest. They might have a home on the property. They might not. It might just be, they go camping, they go hunting there, whatever. Usually they'll call me. I'll go out to I'll meet them out in their forest, and I'll encourage them. Let's walk through the forest, because I can point out what's going on to them. I'll walk through the forest with them, and I'll say, hey, what's important to you? What matters to you for the future of your forests? In my area, almost exclusively, the three answers my landowners tell me are, hey, I want a healthy forest. Hey, I want an area that will encourage high quality wildlife habitat for many different species. And I want, hey, I'm concerned about wildfire. I would like to reduce the wildfire risk in this forest if possible. And the great thing is I can concurrently manage for all three of those goals at the same time. Um, Now, what I would do after that is I would basically evaluate the conditions in the forest for them. And then I would determine, okay, here's the conditions of your forest. Here is your desired future conditions: healthy habitat, healthy forest, reduced wildfire risk. Here, and it's almost always, hey, your forest is at high wildfire risk. Hey, it's not really supporting many wildlife species. Hey, your forest health is declining, often very rapidly. And unfortunately, landowners don't want to hear that, and so it freaks them out a little bit. Fortunately, I offer the solution, right? And so that is to say, I offer a solution, and usually that takes two forms. The two main services I provide, one is forest stewardship plans. So this is a long form plan where I start with it's anywhere from like 10 to 30 pages long with a few maps of the property. And I basically start with the landowner's goals, say, hey, the landowner has identified these objectives for their property. And then I go into, okay, this is the inventory conditions with specific metrics on their forest. Here's what's good. Here's what's not so good. Here's what needs help. Here, maybe we can leave it alone there. And then I basically create like a action timetable for them to follow. Often this is like a 20, 30, 40 year long timetable because forestry is done across a large time scale. That basically helps them move their forest towards accomplishing their goals. Now, the biggest tool we have as foresters to do that is selective logging or selective thinning. Now, before I say too much about that, I just want to say this. Historically, our lands, our forests have been clear cut. They've been high graded. They have been used and abused. And so a lot of my clients, they say, I talk about logging and I see this fear in their eyes, right? And I get it. It's justified because humans have abused this landscape for so long now. And so many of the problems that the forests have are directly a result of the actions taken by my ancestors. But it doesn't have to be the case. So you can go into an area and you can clear cut it, you can high grade it, you can degrade the forest, or you can go into an area of unhealthy forest, which is most of our forest, quite frankly, and selectively log in a manner that helps, that heals instead of harms. And this is the thing that's confusing to a lot of people. You can log in a way that destroys ecosystems, and you can log in a way that heals ecosystems. And what I do is I heal ecosystems through selective thinning, through selective logging. And that's basically the main mechanism for restoring forests to, as I said, their former glory. And by the way, this is backed by several decades of peer-reviewed research that supports that selectively logging, selectively thinning trees in a specific way is healing, is regenerative, is a mechanism in which we can restore our forests and get them on a healthier path. And so that is most of what I do.
So I'd like to point out to all the people that want to chain themselves to a tree, logging is not always bad. It certainly can be, in the past has been, but it's about management of resources, right? So if we talk about a forest as a resource, not for humans, okay, which it is, but also a resource for the planet. And that includes wildlife, everything from fish to beavers to elk, we talked about that. You have to manage those resources or you end up in a situation of imbalance. And when something is imbalanced, it falls over, it breaks. You can see this in engineering. Build a bridge that's incorrectly balanced. Watch what happens, right? It's the same thing with a forest, except that the bridge is not a requirement. A forest is. So what we need to manage this stuff properly. We need to be, stewards of these resources in a way, and we have to be able to think beyond you and me, right? A lot of the work that you're doing, your grandkids will benefit from.
I will never see the
Not you.
benefit of most of what I'm
Yeah,
doing.
you'll never see the benefit.
Never.
And we just have to think farther than our nose a little bit here. Okay, so one of the notes we have here, I mean, you did talk about, you know, some of the tools you have, logging, you know, selective logging, thinning, to manage a forest. You mentioned that, you know, spatial complexity, lack of spatial complexity can show lack of health in a forest. But what is a sick forest? Like not this, you know, with a little bit of work, we can make this better. What does a sick forest look like?
Yes. Let's see if my notes here. It's actually, as a forester that's eyes are trained, I can literally just be driving by a piece of forest and be like, that forest is sick. Oh, that forest is health, like that forest is on a better track. It's something that with a trained eye you see right away, and it's difficult to explain to people. But generally speaking, and this is a generalization, like many things in forestry, a sick forest is a forest in which there is an excessive density of trees, of which we have a terrible problem with. Overstocking is the technical term for it. And this excessive density of trees, which is the result of that regrowth after clear cutting or high grading, those trees are in excessive competition with one another. They're heavily water stressed, they're heavily sunlight stressed, they're stressed for nutrients. Now, the easiest way I can determine this is look up into the canopy of the live tree. If a tree has a whole lot of live foliage, that is generally going to be considered a healthy tree. A metric that we use is called live crown ratio. Let's say a tree is 100 feet tall and it has only the top 30 feet of the tree has live foliage, live green. That would be a 30% live crown ratio. 30% is kind of the magic number we use. So above 30%, generally speaking, you'd consider a healthy tree. Below 30% would generally be a highly stressed tree. So those are kind of, in terms of like tree stress and tree vigor, that's the number one thing I'm looking for. There's also there's a lot of science that shows that the amount of live foliage a tree has above ground is perfectly correlated to the amount of root structure it has below ground, which is correlated to how much water capacity it has. So how much live branches a tree can put out is exactly reflective of how healthy it is and how well it's doing. And so that's kind of the general, again, these are gross generalizations, just so I can be a little more brief and not make this 4 hours long. But that's generally what I'm looking for is, hey, if I got a forest that has all these live crown ratios below 30%, all those trees are stressed. They're all competing with one another. If I have a forest that has greater space between the trees, I can guarantee you that their live crown ratios are going to be above 30%, that those trees generally are going to look pretty healthy. And I would say, generally speaking, that is a healthier forest, a forest with more vigorous, healthy trees.
Yeah, it's funny that you keep disclaiming, generally speaking.
Yes.
And I want to clarify why this is happening. Is that the reality of existence is that we have to be general in speaking because there is always an exception. And it's not that we shouldn't pay attention to the exceptions. It's not that they shouldn't be noted, cited, considered, researched. It's that when we say generally speaking, it means that 80% of what I'm saying is going to apply to 80% of what we're talking about. And that's important because otherwise you're going to get caught up in such a minutia that nothing will get done. And there's no other way to put it. And that's exactly where we are politically. is that I don't care what side you're on, everyone is focusing on such a minutia that the only way things get done is via a bulldozer instead of a considered response to solving a problem. Now, before we get into that, so when you implement action plans, like you said with owners. So like on my homestead, I've got 10 acres. And for anyone who hasn't watched this before, I'm obviously not at my homestead. I'm in our schoolie. But on this property, I have cherry, I have birch, I have alder, I've got various firs, I've got a little bit of cedar, but I have what I consider the enemy tree. And I'm sure it has some biological, ecological reason for existence, but it's an enemy tree. And it's the only tree that snows in the summer. And that is cottonwood. Can you? I know this is a complete side, but I mean, we're talking about trees that just popped in my head. What in God, why? Why? I have these huge, enormous monolith trees that are known. I know this about them. You cut one down, and it doesn't matter what you do to it. You can put it into 16-inch rounds. You don't want to burn it because it smells terrible, and it will retain its moisture for years. I have never seen a dead tree retain moisture like these. I mean, in the sun, airflow, the whole bit. 3 years later, you throw a log on, it's sizzling. So for those of us on this side of the western side, why do I have cottonwoods?
Yeah, so cottonwoods are generally, at least here, they're found along more wet areas. They're what we call a riparian tree. So you find them generally within like a floodplain along a river. They are extremely fast growing. That is their ecology. They're one of the fastest growing trees out there in terms of this region. Trade back, a lot of foresters hate cottonwoods. I don't mind. It just is what it is. Now, a ecological trade-off for cottonwoods growing so fast is they often have wood failure because it's a compromise like anything else in ecology, that if you're going to grow that fast, you're not going to have a strong wood than if a tree that invests more resources into the structural stability of its wood. So the cotton, that's just how they reproduce. That's just the ecology of that. We don't have a whole lot of cottonwoods around here. I only ever see them along areas near rivers, but they're an important tree for wildlife in particular. If you look up into a lot of cottonwoods, you'll see that a lot of their branches are dying, and there's like a partially decayed part of the tree. That's like a lot of wildlife species actually depend on a tree that is partially live and partially decayed. They live within that specific wood structure. So cottonwoods, as much of a scourge it is for many foresters and landowners, they provide significant wildlife habitat and benefit. And just going after them and removing them because you don't like cottonwoods is not great for ecological long-term stability.
Well, it all come in. I only remove them because they are, like you said, fast growing. I mean, to give our listeners an idea, I can have a cottonwood just sprout up in one season. It'll be 3-4 feet tall the next year. Yep. We manage our property specifically for habitat. We have 10 acres, and then we actually only live outside of our driveway. We only live on maybe half an acre. The rest of it, we actually try to manage specifically for wildlife. In fact, I even had an owl, a big old barn owl, just hang out with me for a couple of weeks. He was using our fence as a perch. Anyway, I digress. So let's, as we move on in our timeline here, because I want to make sure that we don't get too far out of what we're talking about. There is a lot of people are going to watch this because of everything that's happening with the current versus past authoritarians in government. And the current authoritarians have decided that people in your field, if they're working for the government, are not needed. Now, just as a preference here for the people that do follow this, because I do, they actually have all been hired back, as far as I understand it.
45 days. It's a probationary rehire. That's
okay. Probationary rehire. So they got basically 45 days to prove their worth.
I don't think anybody knows, but
yeah. Well, and we don't, because it's such a. The way I've been considering it is that there is some good goals that are being terribly implemented. But let's before we get into that on an actual policy basis, there's been a couple things that have happened recently. The wildfires in Los Angeles. So, of course, now everybody's paying attention because, without Hollywood, apparently we would all die of cancer in a day, because Hollywood is that important. But the reality is, how did those fires, how are we misunderstanding as a society of fires like that?
Yeah, I'm going to speak broadly. That is not
Sure.
the ecology that I know. However, I do have a good friend that is a fire ecologist that grew up in that area that I spoke to about this recently. And basically, it's kind of the same old situation where that area that burned is an area that historically has burned frequently. The ecology of that area burns frequently. It's part of the natural ecology. It's part of how.
When you say frequently, are we talking about every decade, or are we talking?
I don't have the numbers.
Well, I didn't mean specifically, but what I meant is, because when we say frequently, that could be meaning every year, which we know that's not the truth, and largely because they probably manage it. But also from a Earth's timeline perspective, frequently can be every 1,000 years. Right. So obviously LA is a desert. People like to think that it's not, but it's a desert that had a forest that went up with a wildfire. So go ahead. I continue with what you meant.
Yeah. So when I'm saying frequently, I'm saying at least every 100 years would be the maximum. Okay. Again, that's not the ecology I know, but I can tell you that where I'm specifically in the East Cascades, the ponderosa pine, Douglas fir forest burned as often as every 5 years. That's pretty baffling to people, but that is every 5 to 30 years is like the rough range where I'm in this elevation. Fire came here a lot, and it helped regulate this landscape. And again, so going back to the LA, they've been fighting fire, for over 100 years now across the Pacific Northwest. So the fires that should have been burning, that are generally how would you say, they're a little more controlled. They're alleviating fuel, but they're not ginormous. They're not impossible. Basically, by denying those fires to burn, you're basically just offsetting the inevitable super fire to happen later on. And so, as I understand,
exactly what happened.
Yes, and as I understand with LA, it's a combination of there was a lack of fuel vegetation management that just wasn't going on. Those homes should never have been built there in the first place. They should have considered the fire ecology of the area. And of course, you can say climate change has an effect, I assume. Again, it's like anything, there's no one simple answer, but those are a few of the main mechanisms as to why that fire was so devastating to that area.
So it's funny that you said they shouldn't have built there in the first place. And that's going to get a lot of people that spend all this money to be like, who are you to tell me? Well, you're stupid. You shouldn't have built there, and you shouldn't have bought there. And this is something that it particularly grates on me. When you have a town, and I won't pick a specific town, but you have a town, and they're like, we have no water. You move to the fucking desert. Of course you have no water. And I understand that sure you can tap an aquifer or something, but I will mention a state, Kansas is, which is one of the hotbeds of agriculture, is actually got real problems with water now because they've tapped the aquifer so far that their wells have to go down to 1,000, 1,500 feet. Oh. Right? The aquifer is drying out. So, you know, again, it's back to management, right? Consider where you move, consider, you know, and it's not just, you know, a lot of people say, well, it was private industry, it's private industry's fault. No, because it's the government that does the zoning, right? When the government says that you can build in an area that is prone to landslides, and then a landslide happens and destroys your house, and you stand there and go, I don't know how this could happen. You really need to step back a moment and think about what you just said, right? So, like on the impacts of the forest, we're talking about Forestry Service, we're talking about park rangers, you know, that whole thing. I'm a huge public lands person, and even though I lean libertarian, one of the places where I am definitely not libertarian is public lands, because libertarians say give it all to corporations, and corporations will fuck you. Period. That their purpose is profit, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, but because the purpose is profit, that means their goal is not necessarily conservation, management, those types of things. So, and that, I'm saying this as someone who owns a company, right? I try to do the right thing. We've never missed a paycheck. We don't have debt. But the reality is, when it all comes down to it, if we're not making money, I have to fire somebody, right? That's the way it works. So we have to consider that. Now, with your experience, what is the real direct impact we're going to see from these short and long, or these terminations, right? Now, to those who are out there, they're like, it was only like 9% or 10%. That's true. We weren't talking about 50,000 people. We were talking about, I think it was 6,000 or something like that. Mm-hmm. But what does that mean? What's the actual direct impact that we could see?
Yeah. So I'm going to speak more locally again. So the Northwest Forest Plan, which has been in place since 1994, produced by the Forest Service, basically guides many millions of acres of Forest Service land across California, Washington, and Oregon. It's basically the plan that says, okay, you know, it manages for habitat, it manages for all sorts of different things. That plan calls for a certain amount of selective logging. We have not hit that minimum requirement of that plan for a very long time now. Now, the main reason behind that is there is not enough, well, there's a few reasons, but there's not enough, even before all these firings, there was not enough Forest Service staff on the ground setting up these selective forest health timber sales, as we call them, that reduce wildfire risk, that are aligned with the Northwest Forest Plan and what the Northwest Forest Plan lines out. So you've got this plan that, by the way, is very conservative. I do not like the Northwest Forest Plan, and most foresters in this area do not, at least the ones I know, because it's overly conservative. It is not selectively harvesting, selectively thinning nearly enough forests to make a significant difference long term. And so we've got a plan in place that is not doing enough to begin with, and we're not even meeting those minimum requirements of the plan. Mainly because a lack of Forest Service staffing. The Forest Service has been in a budget crisis for several decades now. It's been a consistent problem. So basically, they just canned most of the people who were left over on the ground laying out these selective forest health timber sales. Most of the people left over in the Forest Service are the office workers, are the people who are making long-term decisions, who they're more bureaucratic in nature. You know, they're having their meetings, like they're not out there in the woods marking trees, setting up these forest health prescriptions to improve long-term forest health, to reduce wildfire risk. And so now there's nobody left, basically. And so the need for forest health thinning was already, it was already way behind schedule, and now it's pretty much just completely to a halt. Now there are a few, like the Washington State DNR, I believe, has an agreement called Good Neighbor Authority with the U.S. Forest Service here, where basically the DNR sends out foresters to work on Forest Service land to set up these prescription forest health sales for the Forest Service, because the Forest Service can't do it themselves. However, that is a drop in the bucket. Private foresters like myself, you could say, oh, you could privatize it. You can send guys like me out there to make up for all the people that have been fired. Well, the reality is I don't have time, and there are very, very few consulting foresters on this landscape, and most of them are busier than heck anyways. So the reality is the work that is needing to happen was not happening fast enough anyways, and now it's pretty much non-existent on U.S. Forest Service land in this area.
So, trying to play the devil's advocate here, yes, it's federal land, but it's within state boundaries. Maybe the state should manage it. But before I say that, what's going to end up happening when we do this is no matter what, the money's got to be spent. So, and first, let's be clear. When Trump was president in 2016, he actually supported and signed a bill to increase resources to these types of things. Okay, Biden did as well, and then Biden. And now that we have Trump again, now Trump, and I'll give this to Trump. Trump is not an ideologue. Trump is a person who said, this is what I said I would do for you, and you're the one that got me to be on my throne, and therefore I'm going to do it. Okay? So instead of having an ideology of, I'm a conservationist or whatever, he's very transactional. The problem is that, okay, on a federal level, let's say we reduce, let's live in fairy tale land, and we reduce all the bloat on every scale. It doesn't matter with park rangers. It doesn't matter if it's DMV. It doesn't matter what it is. What will happen is one of two things, and probably a combination of both. One, privatization of public resources is the death of resources. You can actually see that. Go to Yosemite. It privatized the hotels. The hotels are falling apart. Why? Because their goal is profit. It is not sustainability. It is not conservation. It's not public well-being, period. I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm saying that is what it is. The other side of this is that the states will take over. Well, there's an argument for that. But the whole argument that started this is not whether or not it's good work or bad work or valuable work or non-valuable work. The argument that started it is that we're spending too much money. So it's not that the work you're doing isn't important. It's that we don't want to spend money on you. Okay, well, now the state's going to do it. Well, guess what? Like talking about Washington, do you know how expensive it is to already live here? In Washington, 90% of the state of Washington populace needs economic relief. 90%. We've got, 8 million people? Do the math. That's how many people need economic relief in Washington state. And so we're going to increase our tax burden? That won't happen because people won't find it, or the people that will find that valuable they're just going to leave because we don't have a state income tax, right? So, and if you take Oregon, don't even get me started on how bad Oregon is, and then California, you can't run it on a state level. That's why it's not the constitutional reason why federal exists, but it's why the federal lands exist and why federal management and federal budget exists for this, because it is a nation asset. It's not a Washington asset. It's not an Arizona asset. It's not a New Mexico asset. And yes, there are forests in New Mexico. They're on the west side. It's a nation asset because we need a good environment. right? Um, so trying to get off my horse here, my soapbox a little bit. You mentioned to Lindsay, Lindsay's our producer, that you're frustrated professionally with both sides of the political aisle for different reasons. And this is beautiful because one side of the aisle has a tendency to want it's really complex because I know lots of people in Montana, lots of people in South Dakota, lots of people in Arkansas. They're very conservative and very conservationist. Okay, and they don't agree at all with the quote unquote environmentalists who are on the other side. So, can you elaborate on this for me? Because you're frustrated with both sides. So, this is a really good objective, independent from a professional's perspective in the industry. What is it that for you?
Yeah, so traditionally, and this is continues to be the case, the Democrats are quite terrified of logging. They're quite terrified of cutting trees. Um, like the Biden administration in 2023, I believe, passed like an old growth resolution, basically saying, "Hey, we need to protect what old growth forest is left." Well, there's not really much old growth forest left to begin with. That's 1% of the forest cover would be extremely generous to say that we have 1% old growth left. It's
May I interject here on that real quick? When you say the one that we have left, does that also include things that have been long protected, like say Yellowstone? I do know that they do plant in Yellowstone. I don't know if they harvest in it, but
they have historically, and so that it doesn't matter that it's protected now. That area has been clear cut, high graded. It looks nothing like it's used to. It is not what the historical forest looked like there. So, little tangent. The National Park Service, which, as I understand it, they are not allowed to cut any trees. They're not allowed to do any timber management like that. Massive problem. And that's why we had with that huge fire in Yellowstone in the 1980s, because you got this area that has been logged, has been heavily transformed, that has this excessive density of trees. That's a huge wildfire danger. And then they say, "Oh, hands off, we're going to preserve it. We're not going to touch it. We're going to let nature run its course." The reality is, and I cannot send this home enough, that our forests are not natural. 99.9% of our forests have been changed forever by humans. And so it would be great if we left them to be and they would fix themselves. But it's just not the case. And so that is the problem on the Democratic side. They're saying, "Hey, hands off, let nature run its course," that kind of thing. Well, that doesn't work. And the science clearly shows that doesn't work. The other side of the coin is the Republicans, who, generally speaking, see forest more as an extractive resource that can provide timber to local economies. You have a lot of counties, specifically down in like Oregon, that are huge timber producing counties, and they do all clear cutting. So they're clear cutting, and then they're spraying all this herbicide, and then they're replanting. It's kind of a complicated political situation because basically those lands are legally required to make money for the county, and those counties heavily depend upon those timber profits to fund their schools and things like that in rural areas. So again, I get it. There is an economic need for timber, especially in these rural areas that have been devastated by a lack of timber harvesting. But both sides fail to listen to the scientists consistently. They fail to understand.
Follow the science.
Yes, seriously, follow the science. They fail. Both sides. I mean, we need to meet in the middle. We need some forest harvesting, but not clear cutting. It's a middle ground. We need science-driven forest stewardship. And I just want to do a quick side tangent to people who are like, "Oh, this guy sells trees and he's arguing that he's taking care of the ecosystem and he's making money off of timber." I don't have a single timber sale that makes money. And let me tell you, it's a huge, difficult challenge of my job telling these landowners, "Hey, there's a huge need to remove some of these trees. And by the way, it's going to cost you money. It's going to cost you a lot of money." I do not manage these forests for timber production. I do not clear cut. I am not looking at these forests as a short-term economic resource. I am looking through the context of how can I take care of this forest? How can I steward this unhealthy forest and help set it up for a good future? And yes, there is some timber that comes off of that helps offset the cost. And that doesn't have to be this evil thing. The average American uses several hundred pounds of wood every year. So if you're against cutting any trees, maybe reconsider using any wood products. It's like you're going to be hard pressed to do it.
For you.
So
this is. Actually, let me interject here. This is I had this conversation, and I want to boil it down on. It's what you said, but I want to give another example. Americans, we are perfectly fine and happy to cut down all the forests. It doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, it doesn't matter if you're a Republican, it doesn't matter if you're a liberal. We don't care as long as it's not our forests. We'll happily import Canada's forests.
Oh yeah, we do.
There is nobody saying in America. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody. I'm speaking generally speaking. Generally speaking, there's nobody in America going, those Canucks up there, we're really screwing them over by taking all their forests. No, they're saying, fuck Canada because I want my trees. Right? So, if you want redwood, we're getting it from Canada. We're not getting it from here. Right? And it's really a surprising hypocrisy. And first off, let me be clear, every country does this. We are not unique. Okay, it is a surprising hypocrisy that politicians as a whole will speak to the benefit of humanity while simultaneously fisting you. Okay, it's just unbelievable to me. Go ahead and continue.
That's pretty much all I had to say about that. It's just like, yeah, it's so difficult to. The Dems and the Repubs, they both got the wrong answer. And I'm like trying to scream from the rooftops, like this is the crazy part. We have the solution to our problem and people don't understand it. People are terrified by it and they want to choose one extreme end or the other. And like many things, the solution is not one extreme end or the other. It's moderation. It's acknowledging that we live in a complex world, that there are no easy answers. And I guess I just want to say one more thing. Logging isn't all good, right? Like, even though that there's all this research that shows that forest thinning is dramatically beneficial to our ecosystems long term, one example of logging that's not so good is soil compaction. The heavy equipment compacts the soil. It really affects long-term forest health. It's not good. I do everything in my power to mitigate it. But again, we're kind of, it's the idea that we could do nothing, but doing nothing is so much worse than doing this selective science-based forest thinning, this forest logging. It's acknowledging, and I acknowledge this with my clients all the time, this is not a perfect solution. There are no perfect solutions because we don't live in a perfect world. And all I can do is offer you the best solution that there is available. And I strongly believe, and the research backs me, that the pros vastly outweigh the cons, but we still have to talk about the cons.
So it's interesting you say that, and we are wrapping up here, but when you brought up the soil compaction, and then you brought up, the quote unquote perfect solutions that people are looking for that don't exist. This is actually, it's something that from an abstract perspective is elephants. So they used to use elephants in Asia for logging because they are much less destructive to the soil. And then what happened is the animal rights activists who got involved and got the elephants out of forestry. And now what's going in? Bulldozers, which destroy. I mean, a bulldozer exists for one reason, to destroy whatever's in its path, right? So it goes to your soil compaction. But, as we wrap up here, one of your favorites quotes from a book by Ethan Tapper is How to Level. The book is How to Level Forest. The quote is, "There is so much that is wrong, and there is so much that is worth saving." Can you expand on that?
Yeah. So this is the theme I've been trying to nail home all episode, that our forests are in trouble, that our forests look nothing like they used to, that we are in an ecological crisis. We are in a mass extinction event. And we're seeing the results of that. Now, that is the so much that is wrong piece. And again, my ancestors, the people who have came before me, have abused these resources in short-sighted ways that have extracted the resource and left me with enormous amount of problems. Now, that being said, indeed, there is so much worth saving, that these forests need our help, that without us, they truly are doomed, that we have the ability to create healthy ecosystems again, and healthy forests that are resilient against disease and insects and drought and climate change and wildfire. We have all the tools in front of us to change the path that we're on. And the question is, can we come together and do it? Can we come together and meet in the middle and acknowledge that maybe the answer is not cutting all the trees, and it's not cutting none of the trees. Maybe it's using science and listening to foresters like myself and others who have been doing this for many more decades, that we have the answer and we can save our forests, but we have to act. And inaction, I always say to my wife, inaction is an action. It's, if you're sitting around on your butt doing nothing, the world is changing around you, and we see that especially these days, that the world is changing very fast. And I'm certainly experiencing it in my work environment. I've been affected by what's been going on right now. And I guess that's my favorite part of the quote is, there is so much that is wrong. And here's what I'll finish with. I could spend my entire life blaming my ancestors for the problems that they gave me. I haven't inherited a broken world in so many different ways, even just through the context of our forests are in trouble. But as Ethan Tapper really points out in that book, which I highly recommend, very poetic, very beautifully spoken, that I don't want to live in blame. I don't want to be angry and talk about what could have or should have been done, because I have tools in front of me to change the world for the better. And even if I'm changing one little piece of forest at a time to make it for the better, that's the world I want to live in. And that's the embodiment of hope that I want to live in, that individuals will change this world. Not so much, I strongly believe, not so much our government, but individual action and individual responsibility will change this world. So I guess that's what I kind of want to finish off as, is you can spend your whole life blaming. And I certainly have been given a rough hand in many situations, but that's not how I want to live my life. I want to live from a perspective of hope. And I can see that these forests that I'm treating, that these clients that I'm working for, I am changing the world in one small little way. And that is enough for me. And I encourage any listeners to just think about that all of us can change the world. And there's never like one small enough action. Like one small action will change the world, and it is. And I guess that's kind of what I want to sign off in. I don't have capacity for the blame, for the anger. I just want to make the world a better place. And I strongly believe that I'm doing it right now with my forestry, and the science backs that.
Well, you put that more elegantly than I normally do. The way I normally put it is, stop being a fucking victim and try and fix the problem. With that, I'd like to mention a nonprofit that is the Kittitas. Please say it for me, would you?
Kittitas Conservation Trust.
We will put it in the description of when we publish this. That is the county. Kittitas is a county in Washington. Mm-hmm. And the Conservation Trust is working hard to, help that area in their forestry and conservation as a whole. It's important that we support these organizations if you can. And with that, this has been More Than a Refresh, podcast with conversations with the most interesting people you've never met and may never have heard of. Our guest was Patrick Broderick, a forester and founder of Eastside Forestry. Patrick, thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me, JD.